Hello everyone. Today we are doing part 2 of the trial master file on quality control, and this time we are looking more so at actual examples via documents. So we're going to do kind of a refresher on what we learned yesterday, and our kind of here are the key things to look for in the documents, and now actually going to try to apply them to several documents, especially if we can go over several different really key, or what we call essential documents that you really should learn. As I've mentioned with this job, you're going through these documents and you're performing this quality control, but if you really understand what these documents are and the bigger picture of how they fit into clinical research, maybe who's submitting it or what's the process to get this document, it gets you a better understanding of the whole process, because you can say, oh, well, the signature is missing, but you might be like, well, there's no way to get that signature. It like kind of helps you understand, or it's a PI signature and you're like, oh, well, they actually probably could next time they're at the site ask for the signature. So knowing what the documents are is a really good way to succeed at the job. And it's something that definitely comes up in interviews, being able to talk about certain documents and maybe like even where you would file them and what you use it for sure. I've been asked on several interviews related to TMF on the 1572, which we talked about last time, and we'll go into a little bit more detail today. So let's get started. So I wanted to give kind of like a little bit reminder of the purpose of the TMF, just because I know there's people who are newer, and just a good refresher, and I probably will try to do this like maybe every other presentation just to make sure that everyone gets the big picture, because it's easy if you don't to kind of get lost, and then it's hard to apply the new knowledge you're gaining to kind of like a rocky foundation. So the TMF is the trial master file. It's the collection of documents from all the different departments and anyone who's working on the clinical trial. So this could be a safety report from the doctor, a form that shows who worked on the trial at one specific site, right? And our example site, just because I live by Stanford University, I just say Stanford University, like let's say Dr. Smith, right? That can be our good example as we go through things. But you have a whole bunch of documents that come from the site. So you could have a specific form, you could have an email from a key decision about the trial. So that could be somebody who's helping run the trial from usually the sponsor side. Remember, the sponsor is the company that owns the drug, that is basically funding the entire trial with the goals of proving that their drug will have benefit to patients and is safe, and therefore should be approved by regulatory agencies such as the FDA, so that they can then sell it and provide it to patients, right? And then there's the temperature log, which shows the drug arriving to the site. And then there's a protocol, slides from a meeting. So I try to just list off from the top of my head just a wide variety of items coming from different sources. So these documents, they tell the story of the clinical trial. They show the who, what, when, and why of a trial. And so that's kind of the overall purpose of what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that these documents are complete and are needed to be in the TMF, and they are ready for an inspection, ready to prove and to tell the story of the trial. So then this is the slide that we had from last time, and just a reminder that when we're looking at the documents, these are the ALCOA C. So this is something that I definitely recommend memorizing and knowing. And then we'll kind of go through today a little bit about the actual documents and how to apply this to the documents, right? But for sure, this definitely comes up in interviews. So I would definitely really know this, and it helps to kind of think about, you have the word that it represents, but really what it means, right? Oops. Okay. So essential documents, as we've mentioned, there are documents that are given by regulatory agencies as these are your essential documents. You have to have these documents. We are for sure going to look for these documents, but it's a very much more of a minimal list. Everything that you need for the clinical trial should be in your TMF. So this is a minimal list, definitely not the total list of what you need. And that's, again, another good question that people ask, because a lot of times people think, oh, essential documents, these are basically, this is what I need. but this is very much like the start of what you need. So we'll go over some of these today, and in the future, you can definitely look at the reference model, which is that big Excel that we have, and you can click on the links and get to know the documents better, and we'll kind of go through that a little bit today. And then as we're going through them, I kind of combined some of these. Last time we had 10 steps, but I just kind of highlighted the first 5 steps, because this is really what you're doing in the QC process. You're not, right now we're not looking to compare if it's a duplicate. We're not looking to see if it's a missing document, because based off of other documents we should have, based off, if you have something, then you should have a couple more if it kind of comes in a packet. But here, if we're just looking at the document, you're making sure it's legible, all the pages are included, it's complete, and that can include for example, like a missing signature. And then we talked yesterday about the date, making sure that date seems correct. And then, you're also making sure the system has the correct date. And then you're also seeing if it's expired, right? We went over medical licenses and how they can be expired. And then you're also checking the document title. And with that, also put document title and location, right? That's usually a check as you're looking in the system to make sure that it's been filed correctly, filed and named correctly. Okay, so I think that's it. Okay, so let me jump to our examples. I have better examples. And so let's start with this. Okay, so this is, let me make this full screen. This is one of the most key documents in a US clinical trial. And I've mentioned it several times, but it's good to really walk through it. This is the 1572. This is collected in the beginning of the study. And it's basically the doctor's contract to saying, I abide by, these rules. And they actually might have a specific statement here. Let's see what their signature line says. And so, can anyone tell me what is wrong with this one? Just go ahead and shout it out. We're gonna practice.
Missing signature.
Yes, very good. The signature is missing. So you see the date, but there's a missing signature. 1572 should always be signed. We talked about most documents, if there's a missing signature line, you want to make sure it's signed. If there are a few exceptions to it, but the 1572 should never not be signed. It's not complete as a result. Okay, so let's walk through the process. I was trying to see whether or not they had a specific thing here saying, I attest to conduct this trial appropriately. Here we go. That's kind of what this is right here. Commitments here, section 9. These are what they're saying. I'm going to, and then this is, I agree to personally conduct and supervise this investigation, right? And so you will see up here is this is the usually, okay, anyone else point out anything else that's missing? And it's not super missing because they say none, but the names of the sub-investigators, this is rarely blank. There almost always there are sub-investigators. Maybe if this document was early in a study and he was like, okay, I commit to the study, I can do it. Maybe I have a team of people that I think are going to join me, but we are like day 1 and we're not going to see patients for another like 100 days. I have time to find sub-investigators, but that's pretty rare. They usually know who they're going to turn to. Another example is if it's a really small study. For example, like sometimes we've had rare diseases that I've worked on where there are definitely smaller studies and you're seeing only a couple patients, so it's a lot less work. So you have a lot less sub-investigators usually. Also, fun fact is that in basically in the US, I find personally that usually when it comes to how many sub-investigators, how many other people are working on the trial, it's a lot more, because I think in the US you want the accolades of like working on a trial and you get your name on things and you want to be involved in things and you think it's good for your career growth. I think in other countries it's much more focused on the patients and being like, oh, if I'm not going to be 100% committed to this, I shouldn't be involved. And so you can sometimes see like 40 sub-investigators on a US study, especially like Harvard or big name schools, where there's people who are trying to develop their career. There's like this box and you can add more lines, and this box is just like a whole page and you're like, really guys, you guys are all going to be doing work on this study, because now I got to collect medical license, financial disclosure forms, a whole bunch of things per each person, right? So ideally, it's not good to just add a whole bunch of sub-investigators. But in this case, the fact that it says none is kind of a red flag. But let's walk through each section. It's good to know each and every section. So the first section is the name and address of the investigator. And then they will say, like, kind of like, how are they going to provide their training and, you know, proof of their training. So usually it's the CV. And then 3 is kind of where, the location. And for example, one thing that somebody caught that was good, as they worked in the TMF and we were trying to review all the documents, and we were coming from a mindset of like a really deep review. We were really trying to make sure that these studies were really ready for inspection, because the company was a small rare disease company. They had been working for a while, and they had been working very, very small, like kind of just like the TMF did not take a priority. They were just kind of really focused on running the trials. And they knew it. They knew that they had not put in their effort to the TMF, but they knew that they weren't going to try to get any sort of approval in like 3-4 years. So like, we have time. We're going to collect the documents, but we're going to just kind of pile them into a corner. And we know that later we're going to have to spend the money to like have somebody go in and do a really good review to make sure we collected everything. And as this person was looking through all the documents, they noticed that they had a document, I forget what it was, but they had a document, I think it was a training certificate for somebody, and the address was different. Like, they were trying to understand why this person, we had training when they weren't on the 1572. And the address for where they kind of were was nearby, but didn't match the address on like the facility, like the actual address of where it was going to be conducted. Sometimes that can happen, right? For example, where I live in like Palo Alto area, we have like Stanford University, and we have like Stanford Health, like Children's Hospital. But as a result, because like land is so expensive, they've expanded. And so there's multiple like Stanford Children's like offices, but they're now in different towns. They're still like 15-20 minutes away, but they're different offices. So that can happen. But the idea is that usually it's done in kind of one location. And so my friend who was looking at this document realized, this is really weird. Let's dig into this more. Like, who is this person who's a surgeon? We have their like medical license, we have all this stuff, but we don't have any other like records of them being involved in the study. So we asked around, we asked the clinical operations team, and they're like, oh yeah, I know that's a surgeon on there. They're conducting surgeries. And so we're like really confused. It ended up being that there was 2 sites, and this happens, and the second one's usually called a satellite site, but they still need to fill out their own 1572 or be like officially tied to the other site. And it wasn't. And so there was a whole bunch of documents missing, a whole bunch of stuff, and it was a really big issue, because if an investigator or an auditor from like from the FDA had found this, it would be big, because it shows that the team really didn't know exactly what was going on. Like, there was kind of definitely, it took us asking lots of people to find the answer, right? And so that means that not everyone, the study wasn't really conducted in the best way. And that's what trying to get ready for an inspection is, usually trying to find those gaps and making sure that you have all the documents, everything's in order, because people change hands, right? And so there's a lot of turnover in any sort of industry, but especially clinical research. And so as a result, like, somebody might not remember all the different doctors on there, right? And so it was a really interesting finding in a situation where, by just reviewing the 1572 and by just like really looking at the address and checking if things had changed, we discovered like an actual big issue. So that's why the address is actually important. And then number 4 is lapse. And for example, like when I've worked closely on the 1572, like I probably am like more rusty now, but I've like known and memorized each section. So I could tell you if you ask me like, what's this section, what's that? Right now I need to, because I don't do it in as much in my day-to-day job. But so it's a good refresher. But yeah, section 4 is the lapse. This is important because other documents tie to this. You want to make sure that there's a whole series of documents related to which laboratory is running what. So sometimes they might have several different labs, and that's why it says continuation you can add on the continuation page more labs, which is common. And just in case this helps understand what's going on. So if a patient goes to the hospital, they're a part of this clinical study, they get seen, and let's say they get drug that's involved in the study. But then a lot of times they will go, and because you're trying to make sure that they're really safe, and you're trying to watch all the different elements that could go wrong by them having this drug, a lot of times you get lots of lab samples, so lots of blood and lots of the different sample work done, and depending on what people think might be an issue, or to prove, right? Like if somebody has leukemia, like having higher white blood cell count shows that things are improving, right? Your body's being able to fight this versus having like really low. And so using those markers helps prove that the study's going well, or can help catch things that are going wrong. So the lab is really important. So in case anyone was curious about like why there would be a lab, most studies have their own labs, and so this is called a central laboratory. PPD is a major large CRO, and they also they have lots of monitors, as we talked about yesterday, a little bit about the role of a monitor. They have a lot of monitors. They also have a lot of labs. So they're really a company that they don't have their own drug and they're not doing anything. They're really this big organization that's meant to support how clinical trials are run. And that's actually pretty common. There's about 3 to 4 major ones and then a whole bunch of little ones. So that's why when you see PPD labs, that's a common lab. And then let's talk a little bit about the IRB. So the IRB is this board that is very much not involved with the study. They're very much like not gaining any sort of financial benefit from the study. And so you want to keep it very separate, because the board is really there to protect the patient's safety, right? And so what they do is, and sometimes they have central IRBs, but sometimes like a hospital itself or a university will have its own IRB, and they say, we approve what studies are going to be conducted here, because we want to make sure that we're not running any studies for like financial gain. We're running it solely for the purpose of bettering society and health and our patients, right? So for example, if you have one thing that I've heard about, like for example, if you have like a heartburn medication, right? That's a really good financial medication, because a lot of people have it, so a lot of people will take it. But you can think about like, well, what does that do to society? Does it really make things a lot better when there's already a product out there that works fine, let's say? So sometimes these IRBs will evaluate, like, should we really do this? Should we really spend our effort and our money and our kind of resources? We would rather be a part of something that's groundbreaking and making a big difference to society. And then on the second part, they'll also look at a study and go, you know what, this is kind of risky. There's other standards of care, which means standards of care means the medication or the care that a patient's getting if this drug, this experimental drug, didn't exist, right? So a lot of times if a study is trying to benefit society or trying to change things in the sense that having this drug approved will bring a big benefit to the world, kind of a thing, because it's going to raise the standard of care. If there's already a good medication out there, then a lot of times it's like, well, the standard of care is pretty good. So for example, in cancer, we don't have a really good standard of care. I mean, there are some, but in general, a lot of times people are looking for a good standard of care. And so there's a lot of cancer research going on because they're trying to find out how do we make things better for everybody. So that's what the IRB does. They are looking at like the ethics of the study, making sure that it's going to be safe for their patients, and they are basically the approval of the studies. There's a whole section in the TMF reference model that we'll peek at that goes over what different kinds of like a whole bunch of different documents that go into and like get reviewed and approved by the IRB. So that's what an institutional review board is. Everyone calls it an IRB, and you can have central IRBs or you can have local IRBs, and they're there to protect the patients. All right, section 6, sub-investigators. You're really looking at how do you like make sure that everyone who's on the study is trained and appropriate for the study. So that's why section 6 is really important. There's also another document called the Delegation of Authority Log, which kind of goes into that thing that we saw earlier, where they talked about making sure that I will, as the head investigator of the study, I will make sure that everything goes well. But a lot of times that head investigator delegates a lot of work out. They don't do everything. They sometimes don't see all the patients, or they don't even perform all the surgeries, right? So basically they're giving, they're delegating all this stuff out, but we got to make sure that they're keeping track of who's doing what. And so there's a separate log that will go over who's actually doing what and making sure that they have the appropriate training. Okay, and then 7 is like the actual information of the study. And then you can talk about like, if it's a phase 1 or phase 2 or 3, and we can go over all the different phases. That could be a different presentation. And then we mentioned the commitments, and that's what they're going to sign for. And then let's see what else we got. So we talked about the additional things. So maybe it's the additional location. So we talked about satellite site. Maybe they put the satellite site here if it wasn't going to have its own 1572. So here are other locations. And then let's see what else we have. And then here are other labs. And yeah, that's about right. And so you can see that there's a lot of items. You want to look through all the pages. And then most importantly, down here, you see page 5 of 5. That means that it's correct. It's complete in terms of how many pages there are. So we jump back over. Maybe I'll leave this at this page. We're looking for, what did we see wrong with it, right? We saw a missing signature, but we did see that all the pages were correct. Legible as in like you're able to read it. The signature was missing. And then also on the kind of like the completeness, like were all the sections filled out? Was the date, was it expired? 1572s don't really expire, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you can check the document title. And then let's go and see where you'd file it. So this will be a fun example because you're going through the whole process of what you're looking for in the document, other than when you're not doing like the metadata, right? And we do have some really good presentations for you guys on how you actually work in an eTMF system and what you'll see. And so I think we might do that next week. But so let's see where we go. So there's the different zones, right? And again, it'd be nice to like learn the different ones. But if we go down, it's pretty sure it's 5. Okay, let me know if anyone sees it. You can see here, there's acceptance of this, CVs, site supporting, here we go. So this is the 1572, so it's got its own section. So realistically, nothing else will be filed in this little folder, just 1572s. Now, if any changes happen to the address, to who's on the study, it has to be redone and re-signed by the PI. So that is something to note, that you should have multiple 1572s, especially if it's a long study. It's not outrageous to only have one, but that means that they didn't really change anything. And so then our artifact number is this. This is where you would file it, right? And so you're filing at 05, 02, 08. And that's important to like learn and get an idea of where things fit in with each other. Now we do have a whole bunch of other documents that we can go over. We're running out of time, but maybe I'll just share you this link. And you can also remember, you can always go through the reference model, click these different links here and explore the different documents. It'd be good for you to know the documents and know where they fit in, right? So let's look at a quick couple. So as I mentioned, this is open. Okay. Sorry if this is small. Oh, okay. So basically, this is the site delegation log. And you can see this is where the name, and they say their role, and they sign it, and they put their initials because they are going to initial other documents. This is kind of like where you check if this is like the right person. And then they delegate certain tasks. And then down here, there's the different delegation codes. And based on this, you can see who has what and kind of what they should be doing. So you can see that the pharmacists have the same delegation task, which makes sense, right? And then if somebody leaves, you should put the date, and then the PI needs to initial, right? And you can see his MCP matches the MCP here, that the person left the study and he's aware of it, right? Again, the overall goal of all of this is we're trying to tell the study, tell the story of the study to show that it was run correctly, that everyone is aware, people know what's going on, and therefore it's more likely that it was conducted appropriately. Now, at the end of the study, see how it says signed at closeout? Closeout visit's the last visit of the monitor, and basically the study's already done. That's when they sign and date. So in this case, you don't need to have a signature here, but at the end you do. Some companies, it used to be that people would not collect this, and I mentioned this in a previous meeting. They wouldn't collect the site delegation log because you didn't actually have to, but you really should. You really should, so you know what's going on. You can make sure that everyone's trained. And you can, for example, on here, you might see that somebody signed this document saying, oh, I'm a sub-I, and I started a certain date. But then you go, well, you're not on the 1572. The 1572 should be updated. Now, that's not really particularly the job of somebody processing the TMF documents, but that's what I've talked about, where you go above and beyond, you know what the documents are, and then that's if you wanted to become a CTA, which then leads to a CTM, which is what I do, is when you're looking at this and trying to get the big picture and making sure that the study is run appropriately. So it's more on the responsibility of the CTM to make sure that everything's working correctly. So yeah, so that's an example. Maybe we'll take a quick look at one more. Okay, we talked about this a little bit before, where this is an IB. IB is an investigator brochure, and it's basically a document that is given, a big document that's given to all of the doctors on the study, and making sure that they are running the study appropriately because they have this additional knowledge. So this document's really science heavy. This is all about like the molecule and the drug, how it works, what they need to do, it's like scientist to scientist, what are the potential issues? Like we have seen X, Y, and Z in like lab rats, and therefore we want to keep an eye out for it, but we don't think it will affect humans. That's kind of what we're talking about here. And so it's why it's really important to have this document that makes sure that everyone's fully aware of things. Or I was on a study where eventually people were losing hair, like it was really subtle. And that's why you need to have like good communication, because basically it's like one person kind of mentioned it, and maybe they've told it to the doctor, but the doctor said, oh, well, she's at the age where she should be, so maybe it's not a big deal. But then somebody else mentioned it, and then they're like, this could be related. They're both on my experimental drug that I'm giving them. Let me go back and check with the sponsor company. So that he reported it, and then as a result, they checked with all the doctors. The doctors goes, oh yeah, I've actually had people. I just didn't think it was related. And so then the investigator brochure gets updated. And communication gets out too. But the idea is that everyone's aware of what are potential risks and issues, and the ICF gets updated. The ICF is the informed consent form, and that is basically a really critical document. And here I'll go back to our essential document list. The ICF is right here. Informed consent is one of the most critical documents because it shows that the patient was fully aware of what's happening, right? Remember, our main goals are safety, and then also the hope is that it's a successful drug and it has an effect, so efficacy. But here, the informed consent is really showing the safety and like protecting patients' rights by saying it's a document that says this is what's going on in the study. This is how, like, what your time commitment is. And it's supposed to be written in a non-doctor to doctor manner. It's supposed to be very much written for the patient, so the patient fully understands what's going on. I just worked on a project where basically we took the ICF and we worked with a third-party company to turn it into like this little like animated like little cartoon that went through everything, and it showed you what was going to happen in the study, how many times you had to go to the hospital, things like that, because it helps to make sure that people are really informed in general in life. That's like one of my things that I like to go by, is making sure communicate, make sure everyone's really informed. It just helps make everything better. And in this case, it makes things a lot better when, let's say, somebody is told by the doctor, oh, you have this disease, there might be a experimental treatment, maybe you should be involved. And maybe they're on the fence, but then they join because they feel like, oh, my doctor told me to, I do what my doctor says. But they did not really read everything. They did not really understand that they had to go to the hospital or the lab like once a week. And they're like, that's outrageous. That's a huge impact to my life. And the time I'm doing, I don't want to do that. And so it's really important that people are really informed. So these are just some of the high level different documents that we went over. I recommend going over the reference model, clicking the different links so you can explore the different documents. So yeah, that is everything, a little high level of kind of a refresher of what we did yesterday and some of the documents, and most importantly, the 1572 and different aspects of it. Yeah, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, let me know, send me an email, and we can definitely do a Q&A. If you can, attend this Thursday's presentation where we will do more of showing documents and having you shout out what's incorrect.